Hi, welcome to the second edition of the Kita Winter Lecture Series. Today we have Dylan Salcedo with us, and we'll get on with the intro very quickly and move on straight into the lecture. So first, this is the rough schedule. So now it's like 7:06, but I don't think there'll be any like major delays. For about 50 minutes to an hour, we'll have the lecture and like a Q&A and also a short break time. And then from 8:05 to 8:10, we'll have like after the break, we'll do the matchup and motion release. And then yeah, after that, we'll have one round of regular BP debate, and then we'll finish the session for this week. Today's lecturer is UADC double octo finalist and also is like decorated judge Dylan Salcedo with us, talking about social media and online disinformation. I'll hand the stage over to Dylan right away so that he can get started with his lecture.
All right. Hi everybody. So I think New York already gave me all the introductions. Wait. Well, as I'm sharing my screen, can you also try to give me like sharing permissions? Um, just a little bit of a background. I am also a graduate student, but I also do my work on things like online disinformation. So I work under a media company. I am still looking for the sharing button, the share screen, but okay, never mind, I found it. Um, and part of what we do in that news company is countering online disinformation. So I'm not technically a writer. I'm not technically like a news writer, but in our organization we call everybody a journalist. So like whatever you do, if it supports journalism and news, you are a journalist. But even then, I am more on the data side, on the research side or the investigative side. And part of what we do is normally when you think of like news companies is what just fact checking, right? Like for example, if Trump says a wrong statement or says that or only two genders, things like that, right? Normally news organizations try to say, no, climate change is real or like vaccines actually work, right? But also what we want to do is to go more into the big picture and see why these kinds of narratives spread or why certain fake news still is proliferating now and like why people suddenly believe that vaccines still cause autism even 30 years in the future, right? And I think also it's also a very nice debate topic because there are a lot of moral gray zones that we want to discuss here. So right, in your previous lectures you do things like defend the right or freedom to expression or maybe the right on access to information. The problem here is that when there is this information, some of the solutions that we want to do tend to remove these rights of expression. That, for example, if someone says or creates a vlog that says that maybe vaccines are not real or vaccines cause autism, why is it okay for us to take down that YouTube video or to take down that YouTube channel? Like the question is, doesn't it like impinge the right to freedom, right? So why is it justified? And I think when you do debates, you have to justify up to a certain extent because certain values are not just like black and white. So you have to defend on your side what is the why is the gray zone bad or why is the gray zone good, right? Okay. Um Next, the reason on why I wanted to focus then on online disinformation or social media is because I think the fact that we all live in the like more modern world, so like I'm unsure about how much you still watch television, or maybe the last time you read the newspaper, or maybe even listen to the radio. Um, Even me, I'm generally like older than most of the people here, but like even me, like I don't really use the radio anymore at all. Like I haven't heard a radio channel for the past year, for example, right? That's why a lot of things that happen in media mostly happen online or in the internet, and why social media is a very very big change in how media is consumed or media spreads now. All right, outline. I'm gonna talk about first about what disinformation is, and there are different kinds of disinformation. We just normally call it fake news in debate, right? But there are different kinds. The second part is gonna be like what the difference of social media is from traditional media, or what other people call legacy media. But also why the shift is because of social media. Like why the tipping point is social media. And it will be great for us to characterize what the difference of social media is from traditional media. No, sorry, other media mediums. The third is other mechanisms for countering disinformation. And because of the new characteristic of social media, why these kinds of methods also need to evolve. Okay. I'm gonna start with like defining what the different kinds of information disorder are. Um, yeah, okay. So I just call it information disorder because these are actually there are seven types. But information disorder is something as presenting something bad or like giving chaos to the information that we receive, right? And there are three things out of the seven that I think are of utmost characterization or the most likely are bad things that will happen. There are two types or there are two ways on which information disorder happens. The first is if it is not real, so it's fake, right? Normally when you just say it's fake, it's just false information. Information that is not real, and it can be fixed by things like fact checking. So if it is not a fact, let's say, I don't know, the sun revolves around the earth. So that thing is fake, right? So that's already an information disorder. The second one is there are, and this is the a little bit more tricky to spot because there is an intent to harm. And doesn't the intent to harm does not necessarily have to be false. Okay? So there are examples of information disorder that are real, like they are based on facts, but they do have the intent to harm. So for example, um in the past few years, we have seen a decrease in piracy or like piracy in the seas. Like there are less pirates now. You know, like the pirates in the Pirates of Caribbean, right? But also recently we have seen an increase in the number of hurricanes. So therefore, a decree pirates actually prevent hurricanes from happening. So that is kind of not false. It's just that there's an intent to harm, but also it's kind of a logical fallacy, right? The second one, and a little bit even more what do you call this? A little bit more real world is if you're familiar about the wildfires in Los Angeles, USA now. There was this post circulating that or actually a newscast circulating that the pictures of the people in the head of the LA fire department they're mostly transgender and they're mostly women, right? And the newscast says that, oh, these are the people leading the LA Fire Department. No wonder the wildfires are still spreading. So technically, the fact that wildfires are spreading is true, and the fact that the LA Fire Department is led by women and gender minorities is also true. So those are not really fake. It's just that um it was misconstrued in terms of logic, right? But also it has the intent to harm because the purpose of that was to basically discredit things like diversity. I forgot DEI. I forgot the E. Inclusion is I. Basically something. It's a policy in the United States that you need to hire a certain number of like minority individuals in your office for you to like fulfill a diversity quota, right? And the Trump administration wants to remove that. Actually, they removed it. They now want to discredit that kind of narrative, right? So those are forms of malinformation. Another one is, when you sign up to a dubious like account or a link, when you click a link and says that, okay, you're the 1,000 subscriber, right? Please click on this link, right? Or maybe like you want to, what do you call this? The personality quizzes that you see all around when you want to know your MBTI or what is the pizza flavor that best reflects your personality, things like that. And then in the quiz it's gonna ask you, what do you usually do? Oh, what things do you normally buy? Or what school are you from? Or what is your age, right? When it starts asking you Okay, this is the personality. Please write the last four digits of your bank account number and the date that it expires, plus the last three digits of the card in the back, the number in the card, in your credit card, right? Oh, and that's your like, oh, your star sign or things like that, right? So those are things like malinformation. It has an intent to harm. When they start releasing your data or start using your public data, your personal data, that's when it becomes like phishing. So that's what phishing is. Phishing with a PH, right? Um, when you go inside, going back into that, so that's malinformation, right? So the intent to harm necessarily true. Misinformation, it's fake, it's false, like like outright false. So saying that the sun revolves around the earth is fake, but doesn't really have an intent to harm. It's more like, so what? There's also like, this person, this like meme circling around like, in 19 what they call this, like in 1982, like Rihanna saw this little child in the street and actually gave a sandwich to this kid, starving kid in the street, and said that, oh, one day you will become a rich person. And then that, oh, this person turned out to be, I don't know, Barack Obama. Those kinds of memes, right? So those are like satire information, satire news. um Also The Onion. I am unsure if you have encountered it. So they post like really funny stories like, Biden, after the first day of inauguration, Biden suddenly cannot talk because he stuck his tongue in the Air Force One like propeller, and now he cannot talk. Things like that. So it's kind of funny, and people already know that it's not real. It's just like it's satire, right? But it's still misinformation. Another one is that most likely you might not know it's real, but you already posted it. That, for example, what was my example? Like Disneyland is gonna allow the drinking, it's gonna lower the drinking age, or gonna serve alcohol to children. But apparently, like, it wasn't children, it was just like certain level, like certain, there was still a, like, they weren't able to release a certain guideline yet. Or maybe trying to say that, okay, this president won the election, but the election results aren't even out yet. A third example was, so there was this Filipino person who was convicted of a crime in another country, actually Indonesia. And then she was given the death sentence. And it's another country, right? So like the death penalty was legal in Indonesia for that, for her crime. And then she was already going to be executed on like 6 a.m. of the next day. And in the midnight, the Philippine government had to like do negotiations and all of those things, right? And the negotiations ended at 4 a.m. At 4 a.m., the Indonesian government decided, okay, we will postpone the execution of this Filipino person. So she's still in prison now, but she's still alive, okay? But she wasn't executed. The problem is, newspapers, why they arrive so early in the morning in your like week, they can sell it already early in the morning, is because they like print the newspapers already at midnight. And at midnight, people did not know yet if this person was gonna live or not. But at that time, most likely they thought that this person will die already. So what they publish in the front page is that, oh, okay, this person died, something like that, right? And then at 4 a.m., so the newspapers arrived at 5 a.m. and you saw all of those headlines. So that's what you call misinformation. It was fake. But not because anybody wanted to publish a fake news, right? It's just that there's a time delay between the publishing of the printing of the newspaper and the publishing of the news, right? So you can do misinformation, but nobody was really at fault. It was just like a printing error or things like that, right? So misinformation is just false, but it has no intent to harm. And then now we go into disinformation, which is one of the dangerous things. And these are things that fact checkers normally want to battle with. So things like, I think now with the rise of AI and AI becoming better, there's a lot of things like deep fake scams. So if you can if you're gonna there you can see a video of maybe Biden promoting a certain cryptocurrency, or like trying to say invest in this kind of crypto thing, or maybe there's a drug, but like you see Biden talking, but it's not really Biden, it's a deep fake, right? So that's what you call disinformation. Or maybe Trump promoting a crypto investment coin. I don't think though it's might be true because it might be true. It's not a deep fake. So no. It's a running joke because like Trump and Elon are now like promoting their own cryptocurrency. Like they're actually doing videos about it. So that's not fake. It's real, unfortunately. Okay? Things like manipulated content and conspiracy theories. So these are, the vloggers that go around and say that maybe vaccines cause autism, or maybe using lettuce, or like random vegetables that might cure cancer or something, or like, and they want you to invest in this kind of like drug or like certain thing. So those are things like this information. Um but even if the only harmful here is disinformation, because malinformation is easy to spot. It's easy to just say, okay, this is fake, this is a phishing scam. You can direct it to the government. Misinformation can be corrected with fact checking, right? But even misinformation can still be harmful because it can have, number one, the potential to promote harm. In the future, not maybe not in the present, but also maybe in the future. But also depending on who perceives this information. Um, Misinformation, even if the person, the creator of the news, thinks it's okay, thinks it's not really harmful, the problem is if someone else reads it, they might perceive it as something else. So for example, if you say that everything is safe here, we are okay, we survived the flood, we survived the hurricane, maybe it's because you lived in a tall mountain and you don't know the whole context. So other people will believe, okay, this city is safe. We don't need to give them help. But maybe the other side of the mountain, a lot of people are already drowning, right? So it can promote disinformation, or it can like prevent people from actually helping that region. But also, um you really have to be careful with what you are saying. So for example, if Trump says that, okay, we're going to build a wall to counter immigration, the people who listen to his speeches have a more extreme value that says that everyone who is not white doesn't deserve to be in the United States, right? To be fair, but with what Trump has said, it's generally true. It's just that, like, we need to prevent illegal immigration. But what people hear is that, oh, no, we just prevent non-white people from entering, or like they are all illegal, or like these people are eating dogs and cats, right? And therefore not human. So you have to and that's why these kinds of misinformation can become harmful because of the receiver. The second is due to time. When you have misinformation that may seem very, very absurd or very, very satirical at the beginning, and people will just believe, that's harmless. Vaccines cause autism may seem very extreme for us, but other people can perceive it as something else, that they can perform different kinds of connections and maybe frame as maybe vaccines are only true for Western medicine, that maybe there may be counter narratives or counter mechanisms that can maybe cure COVID, for example. Um, Even if it were true, even if there are alternatives, the fact that people suddenly believe less in vaccination will also splutter out into like failure in trust in the medical systems, for example. Right? So my example here is, um so we have a Philippine president now. His name is Bongbong Marcos. Um Back in 2013, 10 years ago, there was this we tried to fact our group tried to fact check this, that there was a claim that his family was one of the richest people in the world because they claim to have this gold, like possess like lots and lots of gold bars under their house. It's called the Taliano gold. You can search it up. The conspiracy is that um the leaders of the world, like he's part of the Illuminati or something like that. The leaders of the world actually gave him a lot of these gold bars, and he's gonna use it to make the Philippines a richer nation. To be fair, at that time, 2013, a lot of people did not really believe in that, right? Only very, very few people. Like it's really crazy. It's like saying that the next president of Korea has will give you like one gold bar each, right? It's very crazy. Nobody will believe it. The problem is it was left on fact check. Like it was just there in the internet. Like some blog post in the site, like dark web or something. However, due to social media, you're going to become have an increased reach, right? A lot of people suddenly enter into that. If you're gonna ask like your parents, they receive a lot of like older people receive a lot of messages in their like messaging apps, or they just join these like groups of like all moms in Facebook, or maybe all moms like WhatsApp chat. Maybe it's just like maybe for gardening practices or maybe cooking essentials. But anybody can just post there, right? And just can be an anonymous person and say, oh, did you know that Marcus has Saliano gold, right? And you're gonna give you one gold bar. Um, and that's how the information spreads. And it's gonna turn into narratives that might what we call them whitewashing their family's reputation. So just a note, Marcus, his father was a previous president of the Philippines also, but also instigated a lot of very authoritarian, like killed a lot of people and things like that. And in the end, like he was like removed from presidency. The problem is that um it's like saying if you remove Hitler from Germany and he's going to have like Hitler would have had a child. Now his child is running for like Philippine presidency, right? Um it actually helped them because now he's now the president. Like his family's name was whitewashed, and they used the seed narrative of like maybe they're very rich, or so most likely people believe even if he doesn't have Taliano gold, most likely he might be rich enough to actually make the Philippines richer again. So to the point that a lot of these conspiracy theories came true, right? Not came true, like fueled people to do on the ground action. So on the ground is like, people voting for him, but even more violently, you can see things like if you remember the Capitol riots in the USA, these were all fueled by disinformation narratives. Oh, by the way, as I do go through my lecture, it's fine to raise questions. I'm okay with like stopping the like pausing the lecture and answering your questions right away. If you maybe might not understand something, a certain context, or maybe you want to add something, that's fine. Here, all impacts of online disinformation are important because they don't just stay online. And I think for you, when you try to model the harms online and when you do debate, it's not just say that they stay online because um an online fan war, let's say for example, between I don't know, BTS and New Jeans, for example, can just stay online, but like there's no underground harm. So what, right? The what you need to establish here is to make the harm a lot more visceral, right? Um when I say visceral, is that you experience it on the ground, like, or you experience some kind of real world violence, like maybe people killing each other, destruction of property, and all of those things, right? So, yeah, so the first one is underground harm. When people believe something online, most likely it just not just changes their political views, but it changes their actions in life. So, for example, if people suddenly believe that maybe vaccines cause autism, it might cause things like vaccine hesitancy when the world needs it. So, for example, during the COVID pandemic, we saw the effects of anti-vaxxers. So, like anti-vaxxers have been there ever since, right? Like the vaccines cause autism. This information was as early as 1988. And it was left unchecked. There were no like guardrails against it. Like it was okay to have like blog posts because people thought nobody's gonna believe that. When the time came, now you have a lot of vaccine hesitancy when the world needed it. There were people who were believing, no, we're not cheap. We have to like carry on, right? It also does things like justifying discrimination against against certain individuals, right? So, and I think you can make all of those connections with, like, identifying a minority group and say why they are like, why these kinds of disinfo makes people hate these kinds of groups, right? Remember, I am not like in the early 2000s after the 9/11 attack, there was a lot of discrimination against Middle Eastern people. So it's still funneling. They can still feel the effects into this into the present day, right? Even now, like it's a meme, but like I'm unsure, it has a little bit of serious undertones. If you've seen the recent ad about a certain airline in Pakistan, like saying that they're opening a flight from Pakistan to Paris, and then their I think like the poster was like an airplane going into like the Eiffel Tower. So, it's already embedded so much into our culture that we suddenly have, even if you're a very little bit liberal person, like leaning to the liberal spectrum, you have this like um microaggression like implanted in you to say that most like might be when the person is Middle Eastern might possibly be harmful, right? So those are kinds of rhetorics, or those are kinds of narratives that get seeded even in the most liberal of minds, right? And these are things that maybe perhaps like we as a group, as a debate community that strives to achieve equity, right, should be also be aware with. So try not to like frame. So just as a side, try not to frame certain groups like that, right? So but you need to establish the mechanisms on why people suddenly believe in this. Next, another harm is not just on-the-ground harm to people or vulnerable groups, but also harms media institutions. And this is true because when you have things like viral news, a lot of disinformation, most likely they have this like viral trend, that makes people believe because it tugs into your emotional strings, right? So most likely when you believe in something viral, or when you see something viral, you tend to share it to your people, to your friends. Maybe it's a meme that you want to share to your friends. And I think the best never mind. Um, it competes with the space of news platforms who suddenly present things like news. Might be boring, but because it's boring, it's not usually shared, right? There's even this like data science study about fake news traveling 6 times faster than real news. If you're interested in that, the screenshot is here. You can look at the science behind it. It's just that what you need to know here is that the fact that it's viral means that people have the potential to spread it even more, right? And because of this thing, it tends to persuade you even more than real news. And this destroys, and it starts questioning why people will suddenly still want to subscribe to real news that is not even interesting at all. So that's why it harms the reputability of news institutions. Um, yeah. Okay. The question here, like in order to get the issue to the surface, sometimes we use FYP or viral argument, right? But how do we make it viral if the problem is not popular enough? So, okay, I'll discuss this later. But I think the question here is that, if you have boring news, like for example, vaccines do not cause autism, or like vaccines actually work. It's kind of a boring thing because it's very technical. You have to explain a lot of things. Um, I agree that it really is a challenge to engage your audience. But the question here, well actually, and this is when you debate, is to start questioning, is the end goal to actually reach the end audience? Or is it better to just engage more powerful institutions? Like maybe, so, like trying to spread the news that vaccines work puts the pressure on the end user or the individual to change or for them to be accountable. The thing that you can question now is, should we actually make the audience accountable? Or is it better to hold other institutions accountable? Like, things like governments to change their policies that make these kinds of narratives proliferate, or maybe challenge social media institutions or social media companies to maybe remove or reduce the spread of disinformation. So instead of like putting the burden to challenge the audience, to engage the audience and make them accountable. Perhaps what you can do in your team is to give a mechanism to make bigger platforms or like bigger institutions accountable. And that's easier because they're an institution. If you're an institution, you can bring them to court. You can't bring several people to court if they are not even liable enough. Okay? All right. The next section that I'm going to be discussing here is a little bit on what the online digital landscape looks like. And these are things that you can use when you characterize what the online world is. So nowadays. So it's not just like TV anymore. So it's not just radio. Wait a second. I think the key media thing or the key media landscape in our generation is most likely social media. And this is different from traditional media. So like traditional media is just TV, radio, newspaper. The difference here is that this is done by individuals. So like the content is created by not just the news agencies anymore, but now it's just by individuals already. So anybody can use social media. The second one, anybody can use social media, but also anybody can interact with this. And everybody can see your interaction. So if you say that you don't like this news, everybody's going to see that you don't like this news. Compared to, like, for example, the newspaper. I don't like this newspaper. So what? You know, you get like your friends or anybody across the globe cannot see your reaction. Now with social media, you can see how many people like the page or the post, how many people disliked the post. The third characterization in social media is now they are managed by by large corporations. So if you compare it to news outlets, most generally news outlets don't have a stable funding source. Okay? They rely on sales. Maybe for the newspaper, they also rely on ad purchases, like ads. Now that social media has a bigger reach, they can demand a higher spending or a higher price for the ads that they have. So therefore, they have higher revenue and have higher reach. So therefore, also control a higher capacity about how they control the online media landscape. So that's the difference on how much they can control the narrative with how much a traditional media corporation can control the narrative. Okay? So CNN or any news organization can be as big as they can be, but they can never be as big as social media companies, even theoretically, because they cannot control a narrative as much as like a social media platform can control the narrative. Okay? Next. And this is kind of a thing that you have to discuss. It's a little bit when you try to characterize these things in developing nations, most likely even okay, by the way, I got all of these screenshots from a report, a digital media report. You can view it here in this website. They do this report. This is like a very official report. They do this every year on what the state of social media is. They use it for like companies to like change their practices or maybe like researchers to see how it looks like. But these are like the general statistics for social media, like very widely accepted around the world by most companies. It's done by We Are Social. So they're a company that does this every year. This was from last year, the 2024 report. It's just that the one now will still arrive maybe I think next month. But generally, like there is a trend, right? Okay. Next, very careful when you discuss um developing nations, don't say that they don't have internet, okay? Um, Even me as a person in a developing nation myself, even if I'm in the urban area, we tend to characterize like me in Manila. We also tend to characterize, oh, people in rural areas of the Philippines don't have access to internet. Actually, they do. And there are actually even efforts to increase the internet literacy or the internet usage in even rural areas. Things like mobile hotspots are already present. You can even have Starlink that creates internet in those places. So, and a lot of farmers, a lot of even vendors use this a lot of new technology that uses the internet to help in their transactions, for example. Um, a lot of people in the even in rural areas, even in China, use a lot of what they call this, like online payment mechanisms. So what I know is that instead of using cash in China, they all have these QR codes that you can just like pay an Apple vendor if you want to buy an Apple, for example. So when you want to establish it, it is not that like rural areas in developing nations don't have internet access. You need to provide a lot more reason to believe, okay? Because it's not an OIV anymore, okay? You need to establish, even then, like it's very faulty to just end it in that. It's not just because of equity reasons, but actually because of debate reasons. It's not like you need to establish why or why not. Okay. But I tend to say that okay, why is it possible? Because there are several mechanisms already in place. It's not really that hard already now to connect to the internet. Okay. The effect is increased social media usage. A third one is that there's a generational gap between using social media platforms and messaging platforms. So messaging is things like Messenger, WhatsApp, KakaoTalk actually is also a messaging application, not a social media application. The difference here is that what you post in messaging apps cannot be seen publicly. So it's all private. Just defend if you're a debater, just defend why it's if it's like a diff South prefers messaging apps to social media apps, you can defend messaging apps by saying, it's more private. You can express your feelings to other people without being like having public scrutiny. The problem here is that what if fake news spreads in private platforms like messaging applications? What if an anti-vax article is spread into the mom's chat group, like secret chat group, right? It's hard to fact check that because a fact checker can simply enter that group. Okay. However, since it's private, like you end up in like all of these echo chambers and you don't have the potential for it to spread too widespread enough. All right. Lastly, and this is the last part of the lecture. You can still post questions if you want about the online digital landscape. So I got a lot of just like top line um inferences, but there are a lot more. Like, what's the difference of TikTok and Instagram? Is there a trend now? You can look at that. There is also like a report, like one dedicated report for each country. And for example, if you look at South Korea, KakaoTalk remains to be the largest messaging application. Also remains to be, I think YouTube is the largest social media application ahead of TikTok. But worldwide, TikTok is now ahead of YouTube. So you can use those kinds of bits of pieces of information. Okay. Impacts of the online digital landscape. The difference here is that now social media algorithms are what you call the gatekeepers of information. Okay? Of two reasons. Anybody can publish, right? You don't need to be a news org to publish whatever opinion you have. But also, if you have a fact checker, they always fall under the last line of the algorithm determining what a person sees at the end of the day. So, algorithms are pushed by recommendation things like recommendation data. So, most likely, if you are a person in Korea, you will most likely only view material that is that Koreans actually mostly are relevant to. So, you don't see a lot of news sites from Burkina Faso, for example, because it's in the other side of the world, right? Um, but also, algorithms are only the fastest way to block whatever information spread there is. So if you want to remove false information, it's the algorithm's job. Like you just have to change a certain line of code in the algorithm for it to be blocked. Okay. A case study that I want to share here is what we Cambridge Analytica scandal. This was happened in 2018, and this is what you can use for matter examples. The top line here is that the first the first character here is Facebook because they had personal data of around 87 million users. They have a lot more. It's just that the 87 users were the ones implied in this scandal. And then there's this person called Alexander Kogan. You know him. You know this like Facebook quizzes or like quizzes that appear in your websites that get information. So he made that kind of application and he linked it to Facebook. So there are some quizzes, right? They're MBTI. It links to your Facebook account, right? So that other people will see your result, something like that. Um, And of course, you're normally not going to read all the terms and conditions. But part of it at that time was giving all your personal information into this third-party app. And this application will actually save the information. Okay? And this application was shared by Facebook to Alexander Kogan. And then Alexander Kogan thought that, oh, okay, wow, this data is actually very expensive. I can share it to organizations like Cambridge Analytica. So CA, Cambridge Analytica, bought the data of 87 million users from Kogan, and they used it for like he did a lot of like machine learning and data science, data analytics things, right? And one of them was a political classifier. Like for example, in during the Trump elections in 2016, Trump they saw that a lot of like they were lagging behind in like black people of black voters. So like a certain ethnic minority. And then okay, maybe we should increase our reach to black voters. So they bought data from Cambridge Analytica. Most likely, this Facebook user is black, right? And things like that. Or like is a woman, lives in this certain state. Maybe you can direct or target your political ads to that person. And that's what the Trump administration did, right? So they bought data. Um, Remember the saying is that if you don't pay for a certain service, like say Facebook is free, KakaoTalk is free, most likely they get your data, like your personal data, and they can sell this, right? And that's how Facebook earns profit and all of those things, right? Um, so when you do debate, you have to establish why that is harmful because there are certain proponents by saying that, oh, you know, your data is public. Your name in Facebook actually is seen by a lot of people. You actually put your face on Facebook. It means that you are consenting to the data privacy rules of Facebook, for example. Why is it justified? Why is it not? That is subject for debate. And that is subject for you having, like, it's a burden for you to mechanize why that is actually justified or not. Okay? In the Cambridge Analytica scandal, also in particular, there are three different actors. So it's Facebook, it's Alexander Kogan, and it's Cambridge Analytica. And you have to determine who is the most guilty. Okay? If your debate only aims for you to defend Facebook, you can just say that, oh, okay, no, it's Alexander Kogan who is more guilty than us. So Facebook is not guilty, for example. And that's what Facebook actually did during this case. There was actually a case filed against Facebook. And Facebook says that, oh, we're not directly liable for this because we did not use personal data for bad reasons. It was Alexander Kogan, right? So yeah, things like that. Okay. So debate tip, characterize, try to frame. Lastly, I'm gonna show a few more methods on how to counter things like disinformation online. Okay, there are four. It's that these are not mutually exclusive. You can all do this at the same time. The debate now is whether or not what should we prioritize ourselves on. Okay, so it's fact checking, um, entity takedowns. There's also government regulation and platform accountability. You'll see this naman in the next slide. Don't worry. So the first is fact checking. So it's basically what news organizations do to actually change or say that oh this content is harmful. So the first is it's good because these are most likely journalists. They're most likely going to be credible enough and they are part of like there's actually what you call the international fact checking network that actually accepts organizations based on their credibility. So it's not like so makes it impossible or hard to say that okay maybe this person is only or this entity is only like judging fake news based on their biased perception, right? It's true, it can be true that news organizations might be inherently biased because they are still made of people. There's no such thing as a truly neutral news organization. It's just that there are still guides and guardrails that prevent them from actually pushing their harmful, not potentially harmful biased agenda, right? There are also several willing volunteers that can try to do fact checks. It's just that, you know, they're still volunteers, which leads me to the cons that the capacity of these organizations is still questionable. The fact that number one, they are a third party, they don't have any control of the algorithm. Number two, they don't have any control about how people perceive whatever news they're going to lay. And they also have a concern about people believing their fact checks. So now you can realize, right, there's a lot of doubt into bigger news organizations about whether or not they're actually biased, they're actually doing the right fact checks or not, right? And also, so basically when you say like capacity, the funding, you don't even know if it's gonna work in the future. Once, okay, never later. Next, takedowns. Pros of a takedown is, you remove the source of information already. So compared to fact checking, if you continue doing fact checking and the page is still there, they will still continue to make fake news on a daily basis, and the fact checker will have to fact check day and day. So it's not sustainable, right? That's why takedowns or taking down the source of your information will actually cut off the head of the dragon, right? Instead of it growing back and growing back and growing back. Okay? But also, once you have a takedown, a lot of people are going to be afraid to post already. They're going to be more wary or more responsible about what they post. The problem is, though, you're unsure whether or not we're removing their freedom to actually self-express. Because most likely a takedown will have to be instigated by the government. Okay? And also, if your account is taken down, you can create another account, right? It's so easy to make this. Therefore, might not be sustainable. Third, government regulation. And this is the laws that you see in news when they ban TikTok, when they ban YouTube, or maybe not just ban the entire YouTube, but maybe take down certain not copyright infringement, some privacy regulatory mechanisms, right? So for example, in Germany, even if you talk about how Hitler was banned in the documentary, you can't post it in Germany. It's gonna be taken down because what I know that the government is the only one who can produce media that is concerning Hitler. Even if it is anti-Hitler, you still cannot publish it. It's a law I think in Germany. Um, this is why it highly relies on the political ideology or the political will of this government institution. Because they can have different goals, they can be corrupt, they can even weaponize this for bad things, right? But also like it also harms again freedom of expression, access to information. You have to defend still why certain freedoms have to be restricted for a certain benefit that you're going to have. Lastly, instead of running for the fake news creators, or instead of running for accountability or like making your audience change their views, you can go back to the platform. So if you can notice the funnel here, you have the source of information, you have the receiver or the audience, but it's the way that they communicate is through your platform. It's Facebook, YouTube, right? Online social media just made it faster. It's just that um if you're going to pressure these platforms, most likely they're good because you cut off the communication, right? And therefore, after that, after you cut it off, these fake news creators will not profit anymore. They're gonna slowly die, right? Um, the con though is that it's a little bit difficult to implement. I don't think but even then, most likely the government is going to do a sweeping ban, like what the US is going to do with TikTok, for example, or like what China has done to other social media platforms. Is it justified? Is it not? It's up to the debate, right? But also you have these like platforms that can be powerful enough to actually reverse the decisions of government, just like how Meta can actually influence whatever policies that the Trump administration is going to have. Okay, so that's how powerful the different entities are, and how hard it is to actually take down a platform. It's actually even to the point that it's actually even easier to take down a fake news creator because they're just like a single creator and they highly rely on the platforms for the revenue. If you remove the revenue source, they have no other option. If you remove the revenue source of platforms, it will be easy for them to find other revenue streams. They can get more investors, for example, or they can use ad spending on different ways and not necessarily go to news. Okay? And this brings me to my last I have last two slides. into a little bit more matter about what happened, like all of during all of these like options that the world had to counter this information and what they did with it. So the first is on this news media, what you call the news media bargaining code. It was a law in Australia passed in 2021. The salient points are you're going to require your platform to pay news outlets. So for example, CNN posts news in Facebook. Facebook has to pay CNN because the rationale was when Facebook actually creates their content. So now like if Facebook were a content creator and they post ads, right? Or like they encourage people to go in that platform because okay, we have content. We have news here, we have things that you might enjoy. Please come to Facebook or register in Facebook. We have all of these things. But the content that is in Facebook is not created by Facebook. It's created by CNN. It's created by vloggers, right? So Facebook should pay these content creators, etc. So that's what the news media bargaining code actually wanted to do, right? It's for them to encourage, um, like it's a principal justification for news to actually profit off of things that they create and not Facebook, Google. So of course, Facebook and Google oppose this motion or oppose this kind of policy because why should we pay? But and then what they did, okay, we're not gonna pay them anymore. We have alternatives to revenue streams. We can put ads in other things like viral fake news things, or maybe vloggers, or maybe other content creators for commercial purposes. Why do we need news to make our content? We don't need the news anymore. So therefore, we're not gonna pay you. And if we don't pay you, you don't need to be in our platform anymore. So the end result is there will be no news in Facebook anymore. There's gonna be no news in Google anymore. And for Facebook and Google, that was fine because they have other options. The problem is here, the news organizations were harmed because their ad revenue suddenly goes down, their reach suddenly goes down, and all seemed like a dead end, right? After that, there were some negotiations that happened, and okay, maybe Facebook will comply. Okay, we'll just pay you a little bit and we'll pay you something good. Problem is they only struck a deal with bigger news outlets. So this brings down to the question whether or not big news outlets that may be mainstream media are more important than the smaller news outlets. And you have to frame it, okay, when you do the debate. So like a small news outlet, most likely, are they biased or not? Big outlets are most likely also corporations. They might also have their own incentives, right? Why is it good? Why is it bad? And I'm discussing this because it's not just in Australia it's happening. It's also happening in Canada and the European Union. And most likely these are developed nations. And developed nations have a different set of rules, have a different set of safeguards. And the reason on why this is only being forwarded in these institutions, because these institutions or like these countries think that they are big enough or like democratic enough for them to have enough safeguards. Why is it good? Why is it bad? Still up for debate. Lastly, you have things like community notes. And this was like an innovation that platforms thought of after the COVID pandemic. Oh, maybe we should not. So in status quo, platforms pay news organizations for fact checks, right? In Meta, it's what you call the third party fact checking program or 3PFC. Facebook is gonna pay like a little bit of their like transparency money. Like, okay, organization, can you do like 50 fact checks a month? We're gonna pay you. Right? Incentivize news organizations to create a separate fact checking arm, right? And then suddenly you have people like Elon Musk in Twitter thinking that maybe we might not need big media anymore. Maybe we'll just use the fact checking with community notes. We don't pay these people anymore to create fact checks. But we trust these people because we know that they are citizens, that they are public people. They are not biased. But if you know in X, you have what you call the blue check mark or the verified button, where you have to pay $10 on a subscription model for you to like do things like community notes. You can also have like in Facebook, they're ending the third party fact checking program, but maybe only under the USA. It's still unclear whether or not they're gonna do this worldwide, but yeah, in the USA, there are no more fact checking in Facebook, or at least like the fact checking is more independent. And when it becomes independent, so if in Facebook, when you're a third party fact checker, Facebook is gonna increase your algorithm reach, gonna make you more credible and more widespread. If that doesn't happen anymore, we are unsure what happens with the fact checking thing. So even if you do fact checks, we are now unsure about the reach of our fact checks at the end of the day. So yeah, so those are things that are still up for debate. Okay, so after that ends my lecture for now. We're gonna go through a spar related to this lecture, but maybe I think we have a few more minutes for a little bit more questions if you do have some. Yep. Okay. Uh, okay. Wait, I think that was too fast. All right. If there are no other questions, then I thank you so all so much for coming to this lecture. You can go back. I think this lecture is recorded. You can go back if you want to do a little bit more case building. But if not, yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the end of the lecture portion. Those assign, but yeah, thank you so much, Dylan, for that wonderful lecture. Um, matter that's quite that matter that is quite useful and also related to his. So that was very helpful. And in just a second.